In this video, we are going to go over Chapter 1, Searching for Evidence. So we are on the third step of what should be done at the crime scene. The first was secure the crime scene. The second was observe and document the scene. And the third is search for evidence with documentation. So you search for evidence with a systematic search. All searches should be systematic and very thorough. Investigators must methodically search the entire crime scene to ensure collection of less obvious pieces of physical evidence. Law enforcement personnel should select and follow a particular search pattern, and the search must be prioritized. Evidence that could degrade must be collected first, while not disturbing evidence nearby. The matter of area size and how many people are also required to figure out what to prioritize. And then not usually necessary to involve forensic scientists in this search, unless the evidence is very complex that you would need a forensic specialist, or it is a major crime scene. Evidence that could degrade can be food that could be next to a victim, blood can degrade over time, and then if it's outside, if you also have to worry about animals, so what the animal might try to get at the evidence or try to get at the body even. So there are a couple common search patterns. Spiral. So if you have a large crime scene with no physical boundaries, like an open field or water, you go in a spiral pattern to look for evidence. With a grid, if you have a large outdoor crime scene with multiple people, it's time-consuming going this way, but you can see that it's all going one direction. It's not everyone going all over the grid. The grid is in all one direction in one line. Zone or quadrant. So this would be best for indoor, like a house, where there are different teams assigned to small areas to search, and one searcher is assigned to several areas of equal size. So it's just breaking the crime scene up for investigators to look for evidence. And then a strip or line, a large outdoor crime scene where a coordinator arranges many searches. So you can have more than one search. They're all going in this same line. So how do you recognize physical evidence? The ability to recognize what is and is not evidence is a skill best learned through experience. The more experience you have, the better eye you'll get for recognizing physical evidence. Physical evidence to search for in relation to the crime. If it's homicide, these are all just examples. There are many, many more evidence that you can find. For homicide, weapons, bullets, cartridges, and cross-transfer evidence which would be fingerprints, shoe prints, tire tracks, blood, hairs, fibers, soil. For arson, ignitable liquids and ignition devices. Burglary, tool marks, broken glass, blood, fingerprints, and shoe prints. Pedestrian hit and run, cross-transfer on both the vehicle and the pedestrian. So the vehicle would have some blood and tissue or fabric, hair, and fibers from the victim. And then the pedestrian might have transfer from the vehicle. So the paint from the vehicle, the plastic from the vehicle, glass, and tire impressions if they were run over. So different types of evidence. There's something called a question sample, which is an unknown physical sample. These are the samples you collect at the crime scene. Then there are known samples, also known as control, reference, or standard samples. They're collected from a known subject or object for comparison purposes to the question sample. So the known sample is compared to the question sample. It can establish the connections between a question sample and a known sample to a particular place or person. We'll go over it in just a little. Sometimes a sample must be created by the forensic scientist, which will be in example 2, which we'll go over. The firing a bullet for the known sample the forensic scientist fired the bullet, so that bullet that the forensic scientist made or fired is now the known sample. So here's an example 1. If a question sample is a handwritten note, it can be compared with the known sample by having the subject submit samples of their writing. So the suspect or subject will handwrite a letter, and then that handwriting will be compared to the handwriting found in a note or a suicide note or a ransom note to see if they are similar or not. Another example is if the question sample is a bullet fired from a gun, the forensic scientist will fire the suspect's gun in a way that they can recover the bullet. This bullet becomes the known sample, like I said before, and then compared to the question sample, which is the bullet recovered from the crime scene. So the question sample is always from the crime scene. The known sample is something that can be compared to the question sample to find some clues out, I guess you can say. Kind of make a connection between them and help with the investigation. There's also individualization. So this is the process of proving that a particular unknown sample is unique even among objects of the same class, or proving known sample and question samples share a unique common origin. So individual characteristics follow the principle that no two things are exactly alike. Complete individualization is currently only possible for a few types of evidence: fingerprints, DNA, and physical matches. So no two people have the same DNA or fingerprints or tongue prints. Fun fact. So, examples. If a bullet came from a .38 caliber handgun, every .38 caliber handgun on the planet is the possible murder weapon. Now, so that's called the class identification of it. So you have .38 caliber, any .38 caliber can now be the murder weapon. So finding the suspect's fingerprint, which is an individual characteristic, no one else has the same fingerprint, on a .38 caliber handgun suggests that this .38 caliber, to the exclusion of all others, so if you tested all the other ones out of all the other .38 caliber handguns there are, this handgun suggests that it is the suspect's gun because it has the fingerprint on it. It was the murder weapon. It's also true if the killing bullet can be matched to a particular .38. So guns, when you fire guns, will always provide or make markings on the bullet, and every handgun does it differently. So that's how you can match bullets to a handgun, is you look at the same striations that are found on the bullet. Another example, if blood was recovered from the crime scene and tests show that it's blood type B, then it could have come from anyone with type blood B. Now, they found this blood, they tested it, it's type B. Now, everyone in the world that has type B blood is a suspect. If the suspect you have in custody has type B blood, then he stays a suspect. If he doesn't have type B blood, then the suspect is excluded as the source of blood. It doesn't mean that he's not the murderer, didn't commit the crime, but that blood stain and that piece of blood or spot of blood did not come from the suspect. It could have come from the victim, and where the victim's blood is in a crime scene can help you understand how the victim was moving around the crime scene during the crime. If the suspect has type B, the one you have in custody has type B blood, then he remains a suspect. The next step is to get his DNA, which is his individual characteristic, from the suspect, so cheek swab, and then the DNA evidence from the DNA sample from the suspect, and the DNA sample that they took from the suspect's cheek are tested to see if they are a match. And then we'll go over later in the semester how you can match DNA from person to person, but the main point here is that the DNA is the individual characteristic that can link the blood from the crime, or that can link the suspect to the crime scene, because the blood on the crime scene has his DNA in it, then he is now linked to that crime scene because that is an individual characteristic. Another example, when a piece of glass is taken from a crime scene, like a hit and run, and a piece of glass is removed from the suspect's broken headlight. So a guy hits and runs, he broke his headlight when he fled from the scene. The investigators find a piece of glass as evidence, and they compared that piece of glass to the broken section of the headlight of the suspect. And if it fits together like a jigsaw piece, you're putting a puzzle piece in and it fits all together, then the pieces share a common source. That's the jigsaw example from before. So types of evidence, there's impression evidence, such as tire tracks, footprints, tool marks, latent fingerprints, and paw prints. That means if you press down on something, you're going to make a mark. There's biological evidence, blood, saliva, semen, and vaginal fluids. They're usually located physically, but also by touch and smell. You can see them physically. Usually you need to be enhanced or developed by a chemical means before analysis. So if you see it, sometimes you see people with black lights, and you can see a lot of the time semen and vaginal fluids with black lights. If there's a test that you can do on site to look to see if there's trace amounts of blood, and so that is a chemical mean that you put on there to see if it turns out to be blood. There's firearms and ammunition evidence, which first you ensure the firearm is safe when you find this evidence. Arson and bomb evidence, it's often difficult to find. It's usually located by sight and smell. Again, usually arson and bomb crime scenes are large with a lot of stuff around it. It destroys a lot of things around it, so it's kind of hard to find where it was located exactly, just because there's such a mess at the crime scene. This could be carpet, wood, absorbent materials close to the suspected origin of the fire or the blast. And sometimes they will have accelerants on it that you can test for. Chemicals and controlled substances, drugs, drug paraphernalia, spot tests, visual observations, and odor, like dog sniffing dogs, drug sniffing dogs. And then trace evidence, which is really small evidence that you can mainly see through a microscope. It can be collected in a variety of ways, lots of different ways to collect it. It can be collected by tweezers, forceps, scraping the underside of fingernails, taping to lift off fingerprints or fibers, and vacuuming for hairs and fibers. So in summary, we know that knowing what is and is not evidence is a skilled practice that you learn. It's a skill learned through practice. You have to do a systematic search for evidence at the crime scene, and this ensures that you collect as much evidence as possible. You're trying to collect every piece of evidence you can from a crime scene, and the best way to do that is through a systematic search. The types include spiral, grid, zone, and strip. Question sample, it's an unknown sample collected at the crime scene. A known sample is control references or standard sample from known persons or objects, like the suspect or the victim or the car headlight. Individualization is proving that an unknown sample is unique, such as a DNA sample. No one else has the same DNA, so it is unique. And then there's different types of evidence: impression, biological, firearms and ammunition, arson and bomb, chemicals and controlled substances, and trace. So that is it for this video. The next one, we will go over collecting, observing, analyzing, preservation, and submitting of evidence.